Welcome to the Fifth Trooper Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Fifth Trooper Podcast. My name is Jay Shalansky. This is Evan Bullris.
Hey, how's it going?
And on today's podcast, we're going to talk Unmatched. And joining us from Restoration Games is Brian and Noah. Do you guys want to maybe do a little introduction of yourself? I'll have Brian go first.
Yeah, sure. My name is Brian Neff. I am an in-house developer at Restoration Games. I call myself an in-house time traveler because a lot of times I'm working on games that were released before I was born.
Excellent.
Yeah. But that's not the case for Unmatched. We have been working pretty heavily on Unmatched for the past 9 months, and it's been a really, really great time. So yeah, that's me.
All right, Noah, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noah, and I've been doing game design for nearly 5 years now. I am another fellow time traveler over at Restoration Games. We do a lot of work on some really fun stuff. And I guess the one that we're talking about right now is Unmatched.
So it's interesting about the time traveling because when you took that pause before your years, I thought you were going to say 50. the way you really like stared into the distance, and you're like 5 years.
So that's actually a good point that you brought that up. So what was this Unmatched based on a previous game system, or is this something completely? Because I think I have was it Jedi Power Battles? Is that
Star Wars Epic Duels?
That's okay.
Is sort of it's a soft remake of Star Wars Epic Duels. Epic Duels was a little bit more of its time. It had sort of a roll and move thing, and was all about having these sort of cool heroes that you would play with. Obviously, that one was based on Star Wars, and so. Sort of pulling that out and modernizing it a little bit gave us Unmatched.
Yeah. Just for a little bit of exposition, Restoration Games as a company, we take old, out-of-print, no longer being published games, give them a little bit of a shine for a new era and modern design sensibilities, usually update the art a little bit, and then we release them back into the world to be enjoyed by a new generation. This is a game that actually Brian and I probably would have been the right age. We just weren't playing games at that point.
Yeah.
But this is probably one of the most recent offerings that has been reincarnated. A lot of the other stuff is significantly older. But
so when like one of the things I wanted to ask was the team up with Mondo. Because the artwork in this is freaking amazing.
Like every card's a movie poster.
Yeah, right.
It's funny you mentioned that. Because
yes, that's right. And I think it's brilliant. And one of the things I love talking about on our podcast, especially, is because I'm an artist, and so I love talking art. And so the question that I'm trying to get to, long ways around here, is how much does the art or the IP influence the game for you guys when you're developing and building it, versus do you already have like an idea of, and then you try to find something that fits into that like game mechanic?
So as an artist and sort of as a fellow creative, it's a collaborative experience for sure. A lot of times we end up doing game design first and then getting art off of the ground after that. And so just sort of how the schedules work out that way. Jason, who is our art director, and Lindsay, who is our sort of production superhero, are involved in the process very, very early, as far as getting cool card names and like finding cool effects. And they're both much, much more art-brained, than I am. But they do an incredible job interfacing with, a bunch of different artists.
Do you find Go ahead, Noah.
Just to clarify the process a little bit, the very early on in the process, the first thing that we know is the characters that we're going to be making. And then as we begin roughing in what the decks are looking like and we're starting to think about play testing, Once we're satisfied with the direction and general composition of the deck, that's when we bring in whoever we're going to be choosing to have do all the illustrations, and we have an actual list of concepts that we can start handing them. But the selection of the artist actually happens about concurrently with our initial deck design. We say, okay, well, we're going to be doing the Invisible Man and Dracula and Sherlock and Jekyll and Hyde. As soon as we know that, we know the theme of what we're going for, and our art direction team can immediately start looking for artists that are going to deliver an aesthetic that really complements it. So even before we know what we're having them draw pictures of, we know who we're having them draw pictures of, so we can at least start the search.
Yeah.
And once we really have a more coherent deck list, we can actually start giving them details about, okay, we'll draw them in this position, and they need to be doing this.
And sometimes it's agonizing because we'll get like a box front 6 months before we get to see any cards or anything like that, and we're just, oh, it's so cool.
Yeah. Is there ever a moment in the collaboration where, let's say, an artist comes back with something that maybe you guys just you just didn't think of, and they come back with like a cool pose or like a look or feel for the art that maybe makes you take a look back at the mechanic and go, oh, what if we did this, or what if we added this, or has that ever happened that way?
We've had a couple of experiences where, we see a cool picture and or a cool pose. Usually it happens from the box art because a lot of the times, by the time cards are getting drawn and things like that, we already have like our total design locked down, and we're we're basically putting on pictures to send out to a printer. But yeah, like a lot of times, at least once that I can think of, we've said like, oh, that's such a cool pose for that character on the box art. How do we translate that into a card? How do we make this awesome thing that they can do?
Yeah, sometimes we'll be getting back early sketches while we're still making mid-tier revisions where we can still sometimes swap out a card or fully change the effect because we just need to. That card wasn't working for whatever reason, and it's just time to make a change. If we have art at that point, especially for that card that needs to get the boot, we will absolutely try to make the new card still match that art. We don't want to waste anyone's effort. The other thing that I personally love is being surprised by the art that the artists are delivering. We don't do any of the art direction, which means we don't generally, with some exceptions for specific cards, have any idea what the card is going to look like until we get to see it. So the same thing happens with the sculpts. So when we first got back the sculpt of the Invisible Man, I was completely blown away on their treatment of that, because they could have done something, oh, he's translucent, or done something a little kitschy, but the treatment that they made of that, and for those of you who can't pick one up and look at it, his outfit is fully visible. So he's in a trench coat, he's got a hat, he's got a cane, and he's got shoes and everything, but everywhere where there would be a person, there isn't. So the collar on the trench coat is very popped up, and the hat is just attached to that. So it looks like it's just kind of floating. There's a cane that's just kind of floating in air. Yeah. It's a really cool treatment, and we were absolutely surprised by that. I didn't have any idea it was going to happen until I saw it, and my jaw literally dropped when I saw it. So we definitely have space to be surprised. Sometimes we have the opportunity to work that into design, but I still love seeing all the art.
Yeah, I mean, so Evan and I, when we approach stuff, it's kind of like I come from all the design and like business side, and he comes from the like game mechanics side, and I literally could talk to you guys all day about the art. So I'm gonna have one more question, and then I'm gonna let Evan ask some actually play questions. So the next question I had was, let's say you're trying to, since the art is coming later, how do you get into maybe the voice and the feel of a character? Like, what kind of preparation do you guys do when building out the mechanics and what that deck and what that character are going to do in order to make sure that when it's on the table, it feels like, Bruce Lee, for instance?
Sure. So sometimes it's, you mentioned earlier we have this sort of partnership with Mondo, and it puts us in a really interesting situation because sometimes we're doing public domain characters and that sort of stuff, and sometimes we're doing these licensed characters, and so sort of a first design meeting often looks really, really weird when we go and do it, because sometimes it's reading, 1,000-year-old poems to get card names, and sometimes it's like watching Jurassic Park on loop 5 times in a row. So we end up with a lot of these really weird situations where we're like, oh man, like what's a really cool old-timey word for stabbing someone, and then like the very next conversation we have is like, how do you spell raptor sound? I don't know how to spell that. So it's really interesting. A lot of it is going back to the source material of whatever we're doing, and really, really taking a critical eye at the things that pop, the things that would sound good, the things that would feel good, and embodying those characters that way.
Yeah. Cool. Everyone that is designing sets right now, all of us have a slightly different feel or a slightly different approach on how we design decks or how we approach them. The ultimate goal, though, is to, like you said, make the character really come to life in that as you're playing that deck, you fundamentally feel like you are playing as that character. So one of my favorite things to do at the very start is to pick a few turns and like really epic turns and what those look like. And usually it's a pair of cards, or it's a maneuver and a card, or a card that you set up on a previous turn to follow up on your turn. And just find those little chunks of gameplay that lead to a story getting told later, and find a way to put those onto cards in a way that creates that interesting moment. And sometimes that doesn't work, and it's back to the drawing board a couple times, but usually what I like to try to do is start from those story moments and work backwards. So I find a cool thing that's going to happen, and then I work on making it happen.
We get to have some interesting conversations, because we do talk a lot about like, how would King Arthur fight Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and how would Robin Hood sort of dodge around in this sort of thing, and it's not where I thought I would be 5 years ago, but it's still interesting conversations to have.
So for example, like for the main core set, the two biggest that's really cool moments I hear from players when I'm playing it is Sinbad, when they realize that the more journeys he's on, the better he gets. So like it makes sense, right? You're like, well, yeah. He's fought the giant snake and he punched the giant toad out. Like, of course he knows how to run right? Like he just learned it. And then Alice is the other one with the flip. That's the other one that's like a real big when they understand like, well, you can either go more attack or you can get the defense when you got to run. And that's another like light bulb. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've had people play and go, oh, that's cool, right? Like, and that's a neat it's a neat concept. Like Bruce Lee, for example, his big thing is like a lot of actions in one shot, right? You just build up. So some turns, like, man, come on, just survive, Bruce. Get my Jeet Kune Do cards, and then it's like bam, 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 bam. I've taken 4-5 turn like actions in a turn, and then you go from like being everyone kind of not paying attention to you because you weren't really doing much and you have a low hit point to just like almost one-shotting King Arthur, right? Like but how it works is like then you gotta like just get cards back, right? So you've made this huge pull. Now you're like, oh gosh, please just go after the Medusa, like anything, just let me draw back. So I guess that's super awesome. The question I have is like I think Shut Up and Sit Down had a really great review of the game, and one line that Quinn said was he can teach the game in a breath, and that speaks a lot. Especially when someone sees a deck of cards, they go, because the first thing you think is Magic or a game that's complicated. And then when I'm taking it out and I'm like, no, it's okay. Don't worry. Like it's take the card, here, you can be Bruce Lee. Like you gotta like, and they're like, oh, cards, what am I gonna do? So talk to me, I guess, about how you've made the game, like your thoughts on like streamlining characters and like how does that two action system work for you? Like how did you come to that to make like a smooth gameplay for that?
So a lot of the base system and stuff was in place before we even got here. The sort of, two actions and maneuvering and all of the base numbers and things like that. And the thing that Rob always talks about, Rob Davio being the chief restoration officer at Restoration Games, the thing that he always talks about is, he comes from a very different world than Noah and I did whenever we started playing games. Noah and I have been playing Magic for 15, 20 years now, and we're very into all of that, sort of complex mechanical stuff, and it's really good to have Rob there, who came from Hasbro and was, building accessible games for 20 years before we even got started. So it's really interesting to have him around saying, we need to make sure that we contain the scope of this thing. We need to make sure that this is accessible for everybody, because not everybody is you, right? Not everybody has played Magic for 20 years. And so that's a really nice sort of reminder about who we're making this game for. Is for people who do want to pick up Bruce Lee and they want to feel like Bruce Lee, but they don't want to be overwhelmed. For people who want to be King Arthur and want to swing around Excalibur, but they don't want to have 10 lines on a card. And so almost every step of the way, whenever we're designing this throughout the entire process, that's always in the back of our minds of saying, how do I explain this to someone at a convention table? How do I sit down and explain what this character does in a sentence?
I cannot tell you the number of ideas that we absolutely fell in love with during the design phase and continued to love during the initial testing phase, and then realized, what? This is extremely complicated. Right? That is a really cool game experience, probably for a different game. And sometimes it hurts to do that, but then I remembered that I can just put it in a different game at some point. Or we can take it to the workshop and really get at the core of what is delivering that experience. Is it this extra sentence at the end every time? Well, no. Okay, well, let's remove that. Or maybe we can, this is a cool experience that we want to keep putting on cards, but it's driving up the complexity of the cards. Is that character's special ability really necessary? Maybe we can move that effect over to their special ability, and now we've decreased what the cards look like, but we're still delivering that experience. So one of the tricks that we have is to try and play around with the different knobs to deliver the experience we're looking for while keeping under, it's a little gauche to phrase it, but a word count. It's not a perfect representation of the complexity of the game, but it's a pretty reasonable analog. So it's something we do keep an eye on. A card should not, in general, make your eyes glaze over when you look at it.
So let me ask you this. Do you sometimes, creatively speaking, if I'm doing consulting work for a company or something, and they put me in a box and they say, hey, this is the box you're in, this is where you design, don't go out the box. I find that sometimes I find myself doing things I never thought I would or could do, because the restraints are almost weirdly freeing, and because I'm like, okay, I know the rules of this world, so I know I can design within it. Do you guys find that when you're developing and designing a game, or one of the figures, or one of the characters, that having that box around maybe actually helps you develop a little bit better?
Absolutely. It's not a confinement. It's more of a scaffolding. Yes, there are things that you cannot do within the scope of a game, but at the same time, I don't have to worry about, every time I build one of these, coming up with a new action economy from scratch, or how does the currency and card economy work. I can just use what I have, and that's the system, and it gives both a set of expectations for me, and also an ability to, in some sets, shorthand things. And by that I mean, when you're playing with some of these sets, we design to be a first experience. Usually those are the IP ones, where someone is being introduced to the game system via the IP rather than the IP via the game system. And those we try to keep a little bit less complex, but the ones where we are expecting that it is a already enfranchised audience, we can play around with some expectations in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if you were designing the first iteration of a game. You have to be really clear when you're setting someone up from scratch. Whereas when they already know how to play, you can just say, okay, remember that thing you already know? That, but with a twist.
Right.
And then you only have to worry about the twist instead of explaining everything that comes before it.
And, it's sort of a funny situation that Noah and I ended up in, because we really got, when we first started doing Unmatched, we really got thrown into the deep end. Because our very first experience was like, here you go design a deck. And so, we had played the game a few times and we had done all of that stuff, but we weren't part of the process, before the decks that we first started working on. And so, we broke a lot of rules. We broke all of the rules of Unmatched, like in our first couple of drafts. And,
Learn the rules.
Yeah, it's a really good way to learn the rules. And so it was an interesting experience for both of us at the beginning to just say, let's feel out this room by tearing down all of the walls, and then let's rebuild the walls because now we know why the walls are there. So we sort of worked backwards into a lot of the design constraints that you're talking about, in a really interesting way, where we got to say, now we know what an action means. Now we know what a card means. Now we know what your opponent discarding a card means, and all of that sort of stuff. And we sort of backed into it in a way that now when we break those rules, we sort of know why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what makes the characters interesting is, each character, has a set of rules about them, and then where they break the rules and where they're different is what makes them interesting.
Right. Not all of the characters can have 4 actions in a turn. Bruce Lee can because of the cards in his deck, and that makes him feel different than everyone.
Right.
So all of these restrictions that you put into the game they are restrictions, but they allow, on the same token, a measure of power to be felt for each character, because now you are doing a thing that no one else can do, or that very few other characters can do, and that lets you feel more powerful. So the restrictions can be restricting, but they have a very nice payoff as well.
Well, and because like in the real world, we have gravity. We all understand that gravity is a rule that we all follow. We don't have a choice. So when you see someone like LeBron James dunk, you're like, whoa, what? Like, I didn't even know we were capable of that. And so I like thinking about it that way, where, this is a fictional world, but it has rules that, the characters, and when they break them, like you said, it's just that much more exciting, because then you're like, oh, snap, like, yeah, he's special.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting system where every character feels kind of busted. Like when you get to like, yeah, right. Like that's the whole point, right? Like it's in the back of the boxes in battle, there are no equals. So you'll have like Medusa's not doing much, and then you wait till one of the other players gets low on cards, and from like a previous attack, he doesn't have any defense. You just roll up with the 8 damage attack, right? And they take the card and they read it, and they look at you and they read. They're like, how is this fair? And I'm like, yo. Sorry, like it's
yes. One of the rules of Unmatched is that
right. It's just what it is. Like if you had one of because all the characters have So for example, the listeners, if you haven't looked at any of this, there's cards that are kind of universal between all the fighters that I've seen. Anyway, like Skirmish, I think is one.
It's not a perfect 1-to-1, but yeah, there are cards that are more common or at least shared among multiple decks.
Yeah, and so you kind of get a feeling like there's one that says like, hey, cancel all text in your card. Right, those are very powerful, like back and forth, because most of like King Arthur's is like, I'm going to hit you and I'm going to boost it. So like you can come out of nowhere with these huge hits, but the cancel card will stop that, right? So everyone's got these fail safes. So it's not just like characters going around just like one-shotting each other, right? Everyone's got a couple like emergency get out of jail cards for the most part, or some way to like mitigate, right? And I think that's a really cool built-in. So every character can feel kind of nuts. Like, man, Robin Hood can be annoying. He's got all the merry men. You just can't get to him. And he's like, oh, he's back. Merry man's back. Or you finally corner Bigfoot, and he's like, oh, peace. And you just like, he's out. And then now you're chasing him again. And it feels nuts, right? So like every character's doing all this crazy stuff. But then at the end of the match, it's still down to like everybody's at like 3 hit points or something. I've never played a game yet where it went so lopsided, where I was like, I didn't get hurt and you got murdered, it still always feels pretty close, even when there's like a big like brawl going on or like alliances start getting made like mid game. Like, all right, Bigfoot, you and me, we got that Medusa's getting a little antsy. We got to get in there and you got to punch those hard, right? Like I think that's really cool design where it's just like everybody is kind of busted, but also not. Like that's I don't know how a question would be asked of that, but like how did that, like when you're building characters, I guess, is that like a when you're looking at a character, you're like, hey, what of these universal cards should we put in, and will that keep him like in line with the other ones? Is that like something you think about?
That is deliberate.
Yeah. So we approach everything to sort of get into some designer terminology. We approach every character with a power budget.
Okay.
Where we say like, this is how much power we want to spread across the entire deck and across their ability and things like that. And all of that stuff that you're talking about is very much intentional. We want to make sure that characters can do the things that they want to do. And sort of like Noah said earlier, we all approach it in a lot of different ways. I come from a background of playing a lot of like fighting games and League of Legends and things like that. Yeah. And so like my whole thing is when I'm approaching a character like this, and again, everybody does it differently on our design team, is I like to sort of think about an archetype that I really like. Like, is this guy a brawler? Or are they sort of like a zoning character? Or they do, those sorts of things. And then, look at what that experience looks like. And then the very next thing that I like doing is I like designing a signature card, which is, what is that oh wow moment? Medusa has Gaze of Stone, King Arthur has Excalibur, like the moment that really makes you feel like you're playing that character. That's very top of the list for us whenever we talk about, our decks. We have spreadsheets just of all of these decks. And one of the things that, we do when we're sort of pitching these decks within the design team is we say, okay, like these are their signature cards. This is how they should play. This is their hero ability. And so very much making sure that they feel like they have that, that one, oh, wow moment of, hitting someone for 10 damage or, running up five spaces and gaining an action so they can do two huge attacks. Like all of that sort of stuff is very, very much on purpose to make those characters feel like they have these really high moments.
Yeah, to use another term, min-maxing champions make for interesting champions, but this, at the end of the day, is a card game, which is subject to not a small amount of variance. So as designers, we have this line to walk between making cards eat up a significant chunk of the power budget so that when you are playing those cards, you get to feel special. And at the same time, spreading the power over the entire deck so that when you're not drawing them, you are not just dead in the water. And it's definitely an interesting line to walk, because absolutely we could make, you have 29 cards that do nothing and one card that says you win. And that's not a fun deck.
Yeah.
It's definitely the ultimate power moment, but it's not a fun deck.
So one punch man, right?
Come down from there. And that does sometimes mean having cards that are, when you compare them to another card in another person's deck or even that deck, are just worse. But that's deliberate and intentional and allows us to make other cards just better.
So here's a weird question. When working on something, let's say like Jurassic Park, when you're working on it in your head, do you ever get freaked out and go, holy crap, this is Jurassic Park? Like, I need to make sure like I don't screw this up. Is that like, I mean, how much does that weigh on you when you're developing? That was a really heavy sigh. I think I'm on to something, Evan.
It is definitely a different experience working with intellectual property than it is working with blank slate or open source material. And it's not that, oh no, the pressure's on externally so much as I'm a fan of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
I don't want to screw it up for my own conscience, not because there's someone else, literally it's their job to say, hey, that's not Jurassic Park.
Right.
And that's fine with me. I can totally change to accommodate what they're saying, but at the same time, I don't want to let my own self down and be like, oh, that is not how I pictured the Raptors playing. And if I'm the one who then designed the Raptors, spoiler alert, I wasn't, I'm using him as a stand-in for other characters that I can't talk about.
Fair.
I don't want to let myself down, especially younger me, who was a fan of the property that I'm working on. I don't want them to say, "Wow, you got to be a game designer, and you did that."
You ruined it for all of us.
Ruined it. Yeah, we have some exciting stuff coming up, and it's definitely like the pressure is there. Because we're working with all of the public domain stuff, and we can be a little bit more loosey-goosey on that sort of stuff, where we say Alice in Wonderland, sorry, my internet, I apologize if I cut out.
No, you're right. You're good, yeah.
Where, so for like Alice, we can be a little bit more loosey-goosey, where we can say like, oh yeah, Alice is a fighter because we have this giant sword because we say that she does, right?
Yeah. Right.
Right. We gave her the carving knife.
Right, yeah. And we can't do that with raptors or, with a Tyrannosaurus Rex or things like that.
Well, I mean, you could if it wasn't Jurassic Park.
We could, you're right, yes. But it's interesting because we do have to walk this fine line of like, let's make sure that we're capturing the essence of Jurassic Park, but let's also make sure that we're making a fun game and, making sure that we're constantly putting out cool stuff. In
the same way that we have a power budget when we're designing a deck, when we're choosing IPs to pursue, there's this, we have to keep that in mind. There are definitely IPs out there that, it'd be awesome to work with them, but no one in that IP is even remotely in the correct power level.
Yeah.
They are immediately over budget.
Right, like One Punch Man that I brought up earlier, right?
You immediately cannot
Superman or something,
build a coherent character that is fair in the mechanics of the game and also delivering the experience of, yes, I'm playing this person.
So that's actually a good point. So let's talk about, not to cut you off, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Just do it. It's our podcast.
I was just looking at this, I'm like thinking, so we've got the two, would you call these like core sets? For example,
Battle Legends Volume 1 is definitely a core set. I believe we're calling Bigfoot versus Robin Hood a 2-pack. Is I think
we basically have 2-packs and 4-packs.
Okay.
And then occasionally a Bruce Lee style solo pack.
Yeah.
So we've got so there's this one, and then the one that just released a couple months ago was Cobbling Stone.
Cobbling Fog.
Cobbling Fog, I'm sorry. And what characters were in that?
So that was Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Sherlock Holmes, and the Invisible Man.
Right.
So that was very
era.
Victorian era sort of heroes and villains.
Can you give us a little rundown of those characters? Kind of like what makes them a little bit different, like a general kind of like how like Alice does the like size change, like what each of those characters kind of does. It's cool.
Noah, who's your favorite? You pick your favorite, I'll pick my favorite. And if we pick the same person, we're nothing.
Oh, man. Dracula. Dracula is my favorite. He plays very much like a patient stalker. Like, he will move around the board. He will mesmerize you, get you a little bit closer. Sometimes he will bite people and drain their blood and gain cards that way. And then when it's time to pounce, he will do that, and the game will end in an instant when he is ready. So it definitely feels like you were trying to like peek in the shadows and get him before he sets up the perfect attack to just completely wipe you out.
Yeah, without spoiling anything too much, the one of the times that I was playing against Noah and he was playing Dracula, in a single action, he dealt 12 damage to me.
Oh man, all right, that's a lot.
Which was, my fault. I didn't defend, so I get it.
I attacked. He said no blocks, and I said,
okay,
this game is over.
Already on. All right.
I see this game is over. I really like the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man is my favorite out of that set of 4 because he has fog tokens that he puts on the board, and he can sort of teleport between the fog tokens. So he has this like crazy sort of in and out hit and run mobility where he's like, surprise, I hit you for 5 damage, and then I disappear back into the shadows. So he's my favorite out of the set. The other one that I like to play a lot is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes's ability, sort of like you were saying earlier, one of the sort of great equalizers of the game is you can feint, you can cancel people's effects, and Sherlock and his sidekick Watson can't have their effects canceled.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
So he's really big into sort of knowing what you have going in. So he has a lot of schemes that let him look at your hand and discard some cards and sort of assess the situation before he goes in and counterpunches you or, gets into a boxing match and beats you up.
And then the last one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the interesting thing about that character is that he is actually his own sidekick.
Oh, that's cool.
It is one character that can transform, and the cards in your hand, which ones you can play depend on which person you are. Are you Dr. Jekyll or are you Mr. Hyde? And so the cool thing about that deck is managing your hand so that you can transform and still have a meaningful turn, so you don't leave yourself stranded in one form with none of the cards for that form, and then you have to spend some effort swapping back and forth. And just to touch on the Invisible Man again, that was my second choice. So
Stole it from you.
That's okay.
That's a got him.
One of the things that we wanted to do, there was a lot of questions about while we were designing it. Well, how do we make him invisible? He's on the board, everyone can see him. How do we actually deliver that? Haha, you can't see me. And we elected to go with dramatic irony of the players. Yeah, they know where he is, but that doesn't mean that you can necessarily attack him. So he's got the ability to move between these fog tokens that kind of represents you don't see him until he is emerging on the other side, when you can kind of see the shape swirling out of the fog, sort of thing. And then he has the ability sometimes to just completely disappear.
That's cool.
You pick him up off the board.
Oh, that's really
and
awesome.
He vanishes.
That's super cool. And the other one we don't have here today is the Jurassic Park set, which is super awesome. So what do those two warbands play like?
Yeah, the Raptors break one of the core rules in that you have one hero and they have one health pool, and when they are knocked out, the other player wins. The Raptors are three heroes with three separate health pools, and you have to knock out all three of them to win.
Okay, that's cool.
And they get a benefit. The longer that they stick around, they get a benefit from grouping up and being together. But you actually have to defeat all of them in order to win, and they take up different spots. So that's the rule that they break, and I really like the way that they play. They're tricky to play correctly, but they're really rewarding when you do.
Yeah, the Raptors are pack hunters, and I think they came across really well. And the other person is Muldoon, one of the mercenaries, the InGen mercenaries from Jurassic Park, and he is a ranged character who puts traps on the board. And so he gets to trap certain spaces, and whenever you move onto one of his traps, you take a little bit of damage and you stop moving. And so he's
stop moving.
yeah, and you stop moving. That's the important part. And so he's very much sort of one of those zoning characters where he really wants to control the board. They play very, very differently. Both of those sets, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback on those two characters. Is like, I people saying like, oh, I love the Raptors. The Raptors are my favorite. And some people are Muldoon for life. So.
Well, my dream was just to have Bruce Lee just go ham on some Raptors and just start up like going nuts, punching them all out. One of the things I've been starting to do too is I start looking. So like the sidekick tokens, I get like you can't have a Merlin miniature as well in there and keep the cost at MSRP. So I'm already like looking around for like that doesn't quite look like a Merlin miniature. Like we're already like I've got my group of friends are like, what? Can we get a Jackrabbit miniature? So we're already looking to like kind of like glam the game up, I guess. Is like with
I love seeing that.
Yeah, because we like it adds like have a Merlin figure on there is just really cool. So we're already like pooling around. We're like, well, where can we find harpies? So we're looking like Dungeons and Dragons miniatures. We're like, well, what can we do to get these on there? Because we really like. It's a game that you can play for like 10 minutes, or you can play for like 2 hours and just mix up everything. And I think that's super cool. And like we're really the group of all the boards. What I failed to mention too is all the boards are double-sided. So you get 2 maps out of each game, and that's super cool. The 2-player ones are like a 2v2, 1v1 map generally, and the 4 are generally 4 players can like get on there and have enough room to maneuver around. But each game you have, like you can use the one from the first game, all the characters from the second set, right? Like there's so interchangeable, and that's really cool. It reminds me of Talisman a little bit like that.
We're lucky enough to have a really, really active community. We have a very active Discord. People on BGG are talking and active, and it's really, really great to see because people they do things like that. We have a guy on our Discord who went into Blender and modeled out a Merlin mini and 3D printed it and painted it and like did all this other stuff. Yeah, and I'm like, man, you're more talented. You're way more talented than I am. Because like all of these people who are going in and doing amazing paint jobs and all of this stuff. It's fascinating to see. And just a absolute shout out to everyone in the Unmatched community. If you're listening to this, it's excellent to see you take what we've done as a starting point and sort of run with it. And that's actually a decent segue. Do you mind if I segue into a plug real fast?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So
Just
whatever. You're good. Yeah.
So we are one of the things that we're doing right now is we are running an Unmatched design contest. So if you feel like, and obviously the two of you are welcome as well. If you feel like you have a really cool idea for a character or something like that, we have all of the stuff up on our website, restorationgames.com. And you can go in and get a link to a Google Sheet that'll give you everything you need to sort of design your own deck. And again, we have people on the Discord that are like passing ideas back and forth and all of that sort of stuff. And in the end, we're going to pick 4 winners, and we're going to print their decks into an Unmatched 4-pack.
With
that's awesome.
But
that's awesome.
Yeah. We're gonna do a development pass, but like,
I was gonna be like, I got some ideas.
Yeah. Let's hear them. I'll point you to this Google Sheet. Yeah. So I mean, it's
been oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's been amazing to see like people who are so excited about this game, submit these crazy ideas that like I characters. Like, I'm not going to talk about them because I want to make sure that those people have their ideas intact. But like characters that I've never even heard of, where I like had to go to Wikipedia and like search them. I'm like, oh, that's so cool, and then go down a Wikipedia hole for half an hour.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
One thing that's been happening ever since we released the very first set was people would come up to us and say, "Hey, have you thought about doing so and so?" And we immediately wanted to interact with that in a positive way. So on our website, there's a place where you can submit suggestions for characters, no further thing, but we decided to really amp that up, and that's why we have this contest. So if you have a character, not only can you suggest it, but you can explain why it's a good idea by building us a deck, and we'll take a look at it and be like, you know what, there's something there. And it's really cool to be able to give back to the community in that way.
Yeah. Well, and I think it makes everyone feel like they're part of it, right? That's what, as people who play games and who are fans of all this IP, like all we've ever wanted was just to be part of it, right? Like I want to go see dinosaurs, or I want to hang out and eat some magic food that makes me change sizes in Wonderland. Like, I mean, that's all any of us want. So I think that's really cool. So what's the website again, just so everybody knows?
It is restorationgames.com.
Restorationgames.com.
All right. Well, I think
that's Restoration Games.
No more plugs.
Throw the microphones off.
Cut them off, Evan. I think that's good. What do you think, Evan?
That's good.
All right. Well, Brian, Noah, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No, definitely, man. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Join us next week for another edition of the Fifth Trooper podcast. This has